All right, is it going?
I think so.
Okay, it should be going. Blue, can you confirm that's working? Hi, welcome everybody to In Air's Kitchen. So this is our 12th episode, and today we're going to do chili and cornbread. I've been really excited to do chili and cornbread. I've been eager to get on with this one. So these are both recipes that are a little bit more about an approach than they are the specific recipe. Don't worry, we'll write up measurements and everything, but this is going to be a fun time to talk about what we're trying to get in terms of flavor and give you some like a structured way of thinking about a recipe so you can play around and riff on it. You're trying to figure out how to make sure this is going, huh? All right, so let's see, videos. Sorry, we're not sure if it's working, so we're trying to confirm that. There it is. Okay, it's going. All right, so sorry everybody. We're still struggling with YouTube trying to confirm that the thing was actually going. It was showing some loading error, so you may have been sitting there for a minute, or you may be just joining now. We aren't totally sure. In any case, welcome to In Air's Kitchen. We're going to do chili and cornbread today, and I was just saying I'm excited to show you guys these recipes because both of these recipes are things that I think of in like a structured way, and we'll post exact recipes with exact amounts so you can follow along at home. But what I think is more useful is we'll talk about how to think about these recipes and give you a bit of a structure so you can play around and make changes. And what's really great about that way of cooking is you can use what you have. Once you understand how we build these, I think of these like building a house out of Legos or something. If you understand generally how to do that, and if the instructions were all green Legos and you have gray Legos, you can still build it as long as you understand which ones work and how they work. So that's how we're going to be looking at these recipes today. I've got two recipes here, one's for the cornbread and one's for chili. And the only thing I'm going to do for the cornbread right now is I'm going to turn the oven on to 450 degrees, so we're going to get that hot. And then we're going to get going on the chili first, and it takes longer to cook. I think it may even take a little more time than we have in the show today, so it might still be cooking at the end of the show. Then we're going to make the cornbread. And these are a really nice meal together. They taste really great and they go together really well. And they're interesting. I think they're things that we typically think of chili as a southwestern food and cornbread as southern food. Cornbread has this dual history where it has a southern history, but it also has a northern history. There are northern cornbreads, and we're going to be using some cornmeal today from Plymouth Grist Mill, which is I'll talk a little bit more later, but they do really wonderful stuff. But first, I want to talk about the chili. So what I'm going to do is break down. This is the recipe for the chili. So we've got large onion, we have some garlic cloves, we're going to have beans and tomatoes. We're going to have some peppers, and we're going to have some spices. And if you guys were watching a week or two ago, we had Charlie Bear on, who we're using Charlie's beans today. This is his chili bean mix. And when we were asking him what he likes to make with his beans, he said chili. And we asked him a couple other questions that came back to chili. And so when he's cooking at home with his own beans, this is what he's working with. These have been soaking. I soaked these for probably about 18 hours. But you could start from dry, you're just going to have to cook them a little longer. I soaked them longer than I normally would, but I was hoping it might get me ahead a little bit on the show, so when I'm sharing with you guys, we can get that chili further along than we would be able to otherwise. So as we look at this recipe, there's a piece of this, I would just call this the onion step, but these are the alliums. And so you could use leeks, you could use shallots, you could use spring onions, you could use scallions, you could use chives, and you need to use a lot of chives. You want to get to a place where you have enough of an oniony thing going on, and they're going to provide a really nice background flavor for the chili. But this is a really important part of it. We're making a vegetarian chili today, and what we want to do, and this is the general goal of Clover, is we want to create something that's really delicious for everybody. So this chili does not have meat in it. There are a lot of really good reasons to make chili without meat, not least of which is it's a really great choice for the environment. It's also going to be great for your own health. But we want this chili to be delicious to people who eat meat and people who don't eat meat. And so part of doing that means building a lot of flavor. There's some things that would be missing, and we're not using any meat substitutes here. We're not trying to substitute exactly for the meat. We're not using Impossible or something like that. But we do want to think about the way a chili would come together, and for somebody who's not vegetarian, what kinds of things their mouths might expect there, and how we can make this something that's really exciting and delicious in the end, something that they want another bite and another bite and another bite of. And part of that is we're going to lean on onions. There are a lot of cuisines around the world that do this, and not least of which Indian cuisine leans heavily on the onion family, or when they're not using onions, they use other things that have an oniony flavor. But we get some really great sulfur compounds there. We're going to have some caramelization of sugars and a lot of different layers of flavor. It's going to be a really important part of creating a base flavor for the chili. The beans we're using are the bean component of our chili, so I'll write bean. And we're going to make a chili with 1 pound of beans, so this is sort of 1 pound. And I would say like 2 medium onions as sort of like a amount. So this is sort of a ratio that we're putting together. So if you want to make more chili, you could use 2 pounds of beans and double up the onions. If you want to make less, you could use less beans and less onions. But these are some critical parts of our chili. Next we have tomatoes, and we're going to use can of tomatoes I have here. These are whole peeled tomatoes. And we talked a little bit about tomatoes the other day. You're going to want to look for tomatoes that are tomatoes and tomato juice and don't have a lot of other stuff in there. Do you remember talking about that the other day? Sometimes there's tomatoes don't taste so great. Like sometimes they're packed in water, or they're packed in like other kinds of things, like and it just doesn't taste really great. These are packed in their own juice, which are really, really nice. And it's a very simple set of ingredients. There's sea salt, there's tomato juice, whole tomatoes, citric acid, that's preservation agent. It's a little bit like lemon juice, and calcium chloride also for probably maintaining the color. But it's a pretty simple ingredient list. I like these tomatoes a lot. They also say Muir on them. We're not advertising these guys. They're obviously made in California. They're not made anywhere near us, but these are really yummy. And if we use your own canned tomatoes, that's great. But if you don't have your own tomatoes you pack, these are a really good choice. We're going to use the whole peeled ones because we're going to crumble them in, which is something I like to do. But if you don't have those, you can use other tomatoes, and that works fine. And if you have tomato paste, you could use tomato paste here. You're going to want to make sure that tomato paste gets to a really high temperature. So you're going to want to make sure it goes into the fat, and you really cook it until you get deep color in the tomato paste before you add any liquid in. So that's something we won't be showing today because I don't have any tomato paste, but it's an important technique. If you add tomato paste and you don't cook it really hot, you get like a metallic-y taste, and it's not very good. But if you cook that tomato paste really hot and a lot of oil, you can get some really nice flavor. But we've got an onion stage of this, we've got a bean stage, we've got a tomato stage, so I'm just going to write tomato. And in our case, we're going to do 1 can, and that's sort of this bigger 26-ounce can. And then we have pepper stage, and we're going to use dried peppers, but you could use other kind of peppers. So we've talked now about you can substitute your onions with other kind of oniony things. You could use leeks or something like that. Your beans need to be beans, but you can use different kinds of beans. Your tomatoes need to be something tomatoey, but you could use tomato paste. You could use these tomatoes. I'm sure in a pinch you could use a marinara sauce or something like that, and you could probably get to a really great chili. We need a pepper stage, and in this case we're going to use dried peppers, but there's a lot of different forms you can get peppers in. You might have some, you may have a can of peppers that are like in liquid, that are preserved. You may have, this is some salsa left over from the other episode we did. We made this salsa with dried peppers. This would be great in the chili. I have here some fermented jalapenos. This is a spread that I make and I covet. I really, really like this. These are jalapenos from our garden, and I roast them and then chop them up pretty fine and add some salt to them, and I let them ferment, and then I let them continue in the refrigerator for a really long time. Have a ton of flavor, a lot of umami. They are a little bit spicy. Really, really yummy choice. So there's some different kinds of things you could use. We're going to use We're gonna use some dry peppers today. If you wanted and you had some bell peppers, you could add those in. So I think it's an important part of the chili is getting some peppers in there. Could be fresh, could be dry, could be spicy, could be less spicy, could be a combination of those things. And then the last grouping here, there's 2 more groupings. This one's the spices. And some spices I really like. I like chili powder a lot in the chili, so we'll use a little bit of that. I like ground cumin, so we'll use some of that. I like cinnamon, not too much. I don't want it to taste cinnamony, but I do like to have like that as a little bit of a background note. And then, and this is like mixed, and these are not large amounts. And then the last part of this recipe I have, so this is other, but these are kinds of flavor boosters, I'll just say. Flavor. I remember when I was first running the food truck, we were working over in what's now called Commonwealth Kitchen, and there were some other people working there, and they had a box something, and I think somebody working for me said, "What's this?" And they were like, "That's flavor enhancer." It's mostly MSG, I think, but it was like a box that you could get from commercial food services, and they added it into a bunch of their recipes that they were making, and it was like flavor enhancer, and I'm pretty sure it was MSG, but I don't know 100%. But we're not talking about that kind of flavor enhancer right now. What we're talking about is we're going to talk about some things that bring some umami to the dish, and this is something that a lot of meat eaters are really used to having in their dishes, and a lot of vegetarian dishes don't have as much. But there are some really great ways to get there. So a lot of these things I have in front of me. So one of them is not from the vegetable kingdom. I've got here mushrooms. So fungi can bring in a really nice umami flavor, and you can rely on that in different ways. You can have mushroom stock that you're adding in, and these are fresh mushrooms. I don't love mushrooms in chili, so we're not going to add those in. Here I've got shiitake powder. So I had some shiitake from a farm show that were going to go bad, and I dried them out. I did this in a dehydrator, but you could do it in your oven at a very, very, very low temperature setting until they were completely dry, and then I whizzed them up in the blender, and I keep this in this little jar. This is very potent stuff. A little bit, a teaspoon of this adds a ton of flavor to something like a soup or a chili. So this might be a really great way to bring in some umami. I'm going to go through a couple other options that you have. Peppers often have a lot of umami. This is harissa. This is a pepper paste. So this could be a really nice option. We're going to bring some umami in with these other peppers we're using. There are a lot of things that are fermented will bring this kind of flavor in. This is a bouillon. This is like, I think it's what's called better than bouillon. It's like a paste bouillon. But this has a lot of flavor in it. If you have Marmite in your kitchen, that can work great. You don't want so much of these things in there that the whole thing tastes like Marmite, but a little spoon of Marmite will add a lot of depth of flavor to the chili. I have here miso as well. So these are different kinds of miso. These are from South River, which is a really wonderful miso made in Conway, Massachusetts. So some neighbors to us, ish, and they're definitely close to where I grew up. These are beautiful misos, and they have a lot of wonderful flavor in them. Another thing, and again, I wouldn't put so much, we're not making a miso soup, but you could put a teaspoon of miso in there and get a lot of really wonderful flavor. I have here, these are some of the carrots that we put in soy sauce. If you joined us for the quick pickling episode, we mostly focused on a vinegar-based quick pickling brine, but we also did a little bonus on the side where we put some carrots in soy sauce, and they ferment in there very slowly. The soy sauce is active, and they get a really nice flavor. So the soy sauce itself, the carrots, daikon work really well that way. All of those things would bring a really nice flavor in. This is nutritional yeast. This is something vegans and vegetarians use a lot, maybe overuse. I like it a lot, but I don't think it's what I would go to for umami in this recipe. I have another example of something we can turn to here, which is kombu. So this is seaweed, and this seaweed is from Ironbound Island, which is a seaweed producer or harvester, I guess, that we use at Clover. And the seaweed harvest is happening really soon up in Maine, so I'm hoping we might be able to get some interviews with some people harvesting seaweed in the next few weeks on the show, which would be really fun. But we have here some seaweed. And again, I wouldn't add so much into the chili that it tastes like the sea, but a little bit of this can bring a lot of depth of flavor and a really nice umami into the chili. So those are some of our little bag of tricks we have to work with. We'll use some of those when we're finishing up the chili. But for now, let's get the pot going and let's chop up some onions. And we'll come to the cornbread in a little while. So, oh, the oil's already up. You want to grab that, Blue?
Sure. Should you put it?
Yeah, so
So it covers.
another thing, we've a lot of opportunity today to talk about things we're doing to make this really satisfying to people that are not vegetarians. And one of the things I've learned over the years with Clover, I think one of the biggest differences between the way vegetarians eat and the way that non-vegetarians eat is the amount of fat in their diet. And I think a lot of times when vegan food or vegetarian food feels unsatisfying, not all of that, but often a lot of that is rooted in the amount of fat that's in there. It's just vegetarians often end up eating much more lean diets. I think we probably naturally eat a much more lean diet because of the way we eat at our house. But oils and fats carry flavor in a different way than water does, and so you can't get all the same flavors without the fat. It's also, fats can be really satiating, and I think most Americans don't eat as many of the good fats as we should. So we probably shouldn't be as scared of fat as we may be coming out of the bad science of the 80s, and we should probably use more of it, and we'll probably find ourselves more satiated and eating healthier as a result. In this chili, we're going to put a bunch of oil in it. So I would say we put probably 1/4 cup of oil in there. I think it wouldn't be bad to put 1/2 cup of oil in there. We'll taste it later and so see where it is, but I think this will probably be a good spot to start with. But I wouldn't be scared to. I'll put a little bit more in there. Okay. So I would start out with quite a bit of oil, and now we're going to get the onions going. All right. So we've gone through this a few times because we've had onions on a lot of shows, but I'm going to cut the one side off there, and then I'm going to cut the other side off here, and then I'm going to come down like this through the middle, and then once I've cut it in half, I'm going to use that opportunity to peel the onion. Do you want to get your knife, Blue?
Sure.
Yeah, you can help out. All right. Awesome. And got a little compost for our onion skins there. All right. Now I want the root side of the onion, which is this. So there's this root, and then it's growing up, and it wants to sprout out that side. So I want the root side away from me, and I'm going to do that on both onions. The root side's away from me, and now I'm going to come down the onion. So I'm using a claw so as not to expose my fingers to the knife blade. So I'm not sticking my fingers out, I'm using a nice claw. And I'm cutting not quite all the way through. I'm cutting, I'm stopping just short of the root end. That lets this all hold together, so it's all in a nice clump. And then I'm going to come down the other side, and I'm going to end up with some diced onions. And this doesn't have to be super precise because it's all going to be there in the chili in the end, but we're going to cook it pretty hard. And I don't mind having a little variation in size. There are other applications where we want all of these to be like exactly the same size, but this is not one of them. So, all right, you want to try to cut that other one, Blue?
Sure.
All right. So here, you're going to do it on this so we don't get the onion flavor on the table. And do you remember how to start out? All right. All right, good job. Nice. And do you think your blade's big enough to get through the middle of it, or do you think it's going to be too hard? So turn it out this way. There you go. That's right. I think you got it. Yeah, that's it. That's it. There you go. Nice job. Okay, so set the plate off so you don't cut yourself on it, and go ahead and pull that. I'm gonna get a spoon to stir this. Okay, and I would use a wooden spoon for this. I love wooden spoons. If you don't have a wooden spoon, that's okay. Now, as far as oil goes, I'm using a fairly neutral oil. I think I grabbed a safflower oil. You could use a number of other neutral oils. Would be fine. You just don't want to bring a whole lot of flavor. Or you could use olive oil. I mean, it'd bring a lot more of an olive oil flavor, but it would also be delicious. You could use avocado oil or coconut oil. I would be careful with those two. You just want to make sure you're staying away from anything that tastes off. I've had, there's been a proliferation of those oils in the grocery store. I think it's become part of the paleo diets or something, but as I've tasted them, there are a lot that have some rancidity. So it doesn't taste very good. So just make sure you have something that tastes good to start off with. You want it to be fairly neutral. It's not supposed to bring a lot of flavor. Okay. So when you cut through, you're doing a great job. Look, you want the root part facing away from you. Yep, you got it. This is the root. There you go. Now you're gonna not go all the way through. So you're gonna stop the end of your blade. You go just stop. Yep, but you're not gonna go all the way through. Just go right straight down. Yep, and then you got it. Yep. And you should be able. This knife is sharp enough. You shouldn't even have to saw very much. There you go. You should be able to just go straight down. There you go. Nice job.
It's making dry.
Yep. It is, huh?
Yeah.
The onion's fighting back. You doing okay? Oh. Don't worry, onion. You're getting a good life here in the pot. So these are gaining a little bit of color. I have this at a pretty high temperature. As far as a pot for the chili, use something large. Use what you have that's like heavy and large. I think when you make chili, it's not like a dainty dish. You generally want to make a lot of it and feed people and have a fun time with it. How's that going? Good? Awesome. Nice job, Blue. Alright, you did a really good job. Beautiful. Alright, you want to just rinse your blade off there? That's something about keeping knives sharp is rinse them off and dry them as soon as you're finished using them. The water sitting on the end of the blade and acid from foods, those sort of things can break down the sharp edge at the end of the blade. So you want to, right after using a blade, if you can, you want to wash it and dry it. And when you're drying it, just be really careful. Here, I'll show you, Blue, what to do to be really careful. So I'm going to rinse my blade off. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a towel and I'm going to fold this over the blade, but I'm going to pull it away from me. So I'm not pulling it toward me because I don't want to cut myself on that blade. So I wouldn't ever do it with my bare fingers, and I'd always be a little bit careful to make sure my fingers don't go too far over that blade. So keep your fingers sort of on this side of it. Does that make sense? And the towel can sort of dry it off. You got it. Just pull it away from you. Perfect. And then that's good. And that way you aren't going to cut yourself accidentally on a sharp, sharp blade at the end of your knife. So put the blade away. This sort of cutting block, knife block, is really great for that same reason. The wood will do something to absorb the moisture. So if you put a blade in there that has a little bit of moisture on it, that wood will sort of suck that moisture away from your blade and keep it dry. Alright, so we've still got a pretty high temperature going here. We're getting a little bit of color on these onions, which is looking great. It's a lot of onions, but we're going to make a good pot of chili here. And these are going to be a really important part of the flavor. If you had, I would say if you had half as much onions, that would still be okay. I wouldn't have a lot more than this, but I wouldn't have too scant either. You want to have enough onions in there that we can build some really nice flavor. The next thing we're going to do here is some garlic. So these are in the same family as onions. And
Tricky manufacturer.
no, you can put it away. Thanks. And the way I generally work with garlic, the garlic I get usually has some roots on it, and the roots are sort of dirty a little bit. So I'm going to just cut the roots off with that dirt that goes with them. I'm going to do this for both heads, sorry. We're going to use 2 full heads of garlic. These are pretty small though, so if you had bigger heads of garlic, maybe you just use 1. And now what I'm going to do, so they're all held together, but there's no dirt anymore. I'm just reaching in there with my finger, and I'm breaking these up. So I'm just going to reach in there around that stem and just break them off the stem. So this is the stem, we're going to get rid of that. And yeah, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the knife, and I'm going to hit it with the palm of my hand. Again, I don't want to go like this and cut my hand, so you just want to be a little bit careful when you do that. That said, this is a really, really wonderful technique. If you're not sure about your ability to do that without cutting yourself, you could use something that's not a knife for this. Let me show you an example of what that might look like. Okay, so I have this in a pastry cutter. This can work for this job too. So I can put that on there and smash that with my palm. Do you want to smash that a couple times, Drew? But you're just basically looking to crush the garlic. And when you do, the garlic will fall away from the skin really nicely and easily. How's that working? Good?
Pretty good.
Alright, and then garlic is much more fragile than onions. So when it hits the heat, it's going to go through its cooking and then it's going to arrive at its doneness much more quickly than the onions. And it gets burnt more easily. And when garlic is burnt, it tastes foul. Onions, as they burn, they don't taste as bad, but garlic tastes really bad because it's very bitter. So we're almost always going to, if we're doing onions and garlic, we're almost always going to start with the onions and then add the garlic later and not at the start. We've got a little more here. Awesome. All right. There we go. And so again, I got all this debris here. I'm going to clear this into my compost like that, and then I'm actually going to take this and rinse it again. There's a lot of rinsing of this board, but I don't want those little dirty pieces to end up in the chili that we're making. And I'm going to use the same board again, but I just rinsed it off and dried it. And now I'm going to use my knife, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these. I'm using my hand to sort of corral them and hold them in place, but I'm using a nice claw, not sticking out my fingertips. And I'm going through them once. I'm going to go through them another time too. What I'm focusing on is I'm not worrying too much that they're jumping around a little bit. It's fine with me. I'm just methodically moving my blade like one little cut at a time through the garlic. So one little cut at a time. And now I'm at a place where they're like in a nice rough chop. Now for some recipes, I might want to go much, much more finely than this, but I don't really need to with these. And I'm doing a different technique now. I'm sort of bringing my blade through a sweep now, and this is letting me get some of those wayward garlics that are a little bit large. That's going to be a pretty happy spot for us. I want to get all those garlics in there. We worked hard for them. I don't want any of them escaping. And then we're going to use this scraper and just bring those right on top of the onions. Alright. Now we get to decide if we want to bring in any of those flavors we're playing with. I'm saying this would be a great time right now to bring in tomato paste if you're going to do it. And we're not doing tomato paste, but if we want, there's some other things that we might play with, which would be this would be a good time to add. And so I am going to grab my harissa here. I'm not adding a lot, but I think this will be a little bit fun for this show. I'm going to put in, I don't know, a tablespoon, maybe a little more than that, of harissa. I thought that would be fun for this show because we use harissa in some of the Middle Eastern cooking, and it's we're doing maybe a little bit of a clovery twist on this chili. Now, I'm going to let this get up to a nice temperature. You can see the red of that tomato paste shifting the color of these onions. And you can see there's a good amount of oil in there. That's good. I want that. I'm going to want that in the chili at the end. It's going to be a really important piece of bringing all the flavors together and letting everything carry. Now, while that's happening, we're going to get some cumin ready. If you have some ground cumin, that would work fine. You could just use it, and I'm surprised I didn't have more in there, but I was almost sure that wasn't cumin because there was so little in there, but I think we must have used the cumin for something recently. Do we have any extra cumin? No? I think that'll work for us, but let's get a couple other things out here. Let's get some smoked paprika. That's cumin. That's a ground cumin already, so I'll show people. We got some chili powder. Got some chipotle chili powder. And let's get some cinnamon. All right, so we got some things out that we'll use later. Those will be fun. Let's see if they have anything else we got. I think that's probably good. So I've got cumin here, and not as much of it as I thought I would have, but that's all right. We're going to put some of these. We're going to put some of these in the pan, and we're going to toast these up, and then we're going to grind them. That's probably about the right amount, so I can just show you how much I put there. So it's probably a teaspoon and a half or so. We'll put that in the recipe at the end. So I've got a hot oven. I'm just going to put it right in the oven and let those toast up. They're going to go pretty quickly, so they're only going to be in there for a few minutes. And then what we're going to do is grind those up, and we'll add that. So you can see there's a lot of flavor starting to build in here. Don't be scared to bring some color, especially now that that harissa is in there. That should be caramelizing a little bit and changing color in there. That's what we want it to do.
Why do onions make you cry?
Why do onions make you cry? That is a really good question. You know, let's have a little like supplemental science one on that, because there's some chemistry involved and we have to talk a little bit about what's happening. But the quick version of it is there's some chemicals that are released when the onion cells are broken that react with the air and make some gases that get up from the onion into your eye, and those gases irritate you and make you cry. But we can go into that in more detail sometime. If you remind me, I think that would be really fun. People would probably like to go into that. So let's, we're getting pretty close here. I've got here a little bit of soy sauce with those carrots, and I'm not going to go heavy on carrots in the chili, but a little bit of them wouldn't be bad. And I think the pickled in the soy sauce, they have a really nice flavor. Let's check in on those chili and the cumin seeds. All right, so I'm going to move them around, and I'm going to smell them, and they're starting to smell fragrant. These are going to go pretty quickly. This is a hot oven right now, so these are really not going to take much time. We're going to give them another few seconds right there. I'm getting a mortar and pestle ready. If you don't have one of these, there are other ways you could grind the cumin seeds. I wouldn't do it in the coffee grinder, but the blender works really well. A food processor can work for that as well. So let's bring those out in a moment, and then we'll grind them up. And what we'll do, often when I'm grinding spice at home, I'll grind them up with some salt. So what we'll do is we'll take some salt here, and we'll add that in. That's we're going to be measuring the salt later to season it, so I'm putting in less salt than I know I need in the end right there. And I'm going to come in here, this hot oven, and I'm going to smell my cumin, and it's smelling really good. And so what I'm going to do now is just pour it on in there. And you can go ahead and smash at it, Blue. And so Blue's smashing it up in the mortar and pestle. I think this is the pestle, and this is the mortar. And here, I'll show a really quick little thing. It's smelling so fragrant. Do you smell that? It smells like awesome right now. Yeah, it does smell like Indian food a little bit. We're like releasing lots of oils and smells. I don't love a really cumin heavy chili. So for the amount of chili we're making, this represents a pretty light amount of cumin. Let me show just for a second. So what Blue's doing is sort of smashing at it, which is a really good technique. Another thing you can do with the mortar and pestle is come around in a circle. What happens when you do this is that the round here, it comes against the side, and a little seed will get caught there, and then as you're coming, it sort of brings that seed into like a narrow passageway and crushes it. So this is a really effective way to use a mortar and pestle, is to go in circles, and you sort of go from high up, and you slowly make a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller circle. And as you do that, you'll start grinding everything in there, just totally pulverizing it. You want to keep going at that? All right. We are at a place now where I'm turning down the heat a little bit on this, which is going to be great. And we're going to bring that cumin in. All right, looks awesome, Blue. Good job. All right, so we're going to bring this cumin in now. I'm bringing the cumin in now because I want to get a little bit of the fat, the hot fat on the cumin, and this is going to cool down when I add all those beans and the cooking liquid. So I want to spread some of that cumin flavor around in the oils. I'm also going to add a little bit of my chili powder. Here we go. So this is just a chili powder. I probably got it from Curio Spice or somebody else. I'm not going to put a lot in. I may put like that much in right now, say half a teaspoon, maybe a quarter of a teaspoon. I'm putting it in now for some of the same reasons, sort of get it in. And I have some other fun chilies I get to work with. I have here Urfa chili, which we might put a little bit of that on later. I'm going to put that in. And then this one is a smoked paprika, which is going to bring a really nice depth of flavor. We were talking about umami earlier, and one way to build some of those flavors is with smoked ingredients. And so that's a smoked dry chili that's been ground up. Last but not least, I'm going to add some of these carrots and a little bit of their pickling liquid. So that's soy sauce right now. And you're going to hear that soy sauce. Soy sauce goes through a little flavor transformation when it hits high heat. And that's all happening right now, and I can smell it. It's smelling really yummy. All right, and now we're getting to a place where we're going to add in our tomatoes. I should cut these up open these cans before the show, so you guys don't have to wait and watch me open a can every time. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm going to just go ahead and pour the liquid right in there. All right, I'm going to pour that liquid right in there. And then I'm going to take these whole tomatoes in my hands, and I'm going to try not to get too much on myself. It's a little bit of a messy job. And I'm going to sort of just smush them up. I like them having some shape like that. I don't mind. I don't want them to be pulverized. I'm going to just drop them in when they're like these long dangling pieces of tomato. You want to try some of those, Blue?
Sure.
Sort of fun. It gets pretty messy pretty easily. My recommendation is sort of cover it a little and jam a thumb into it. Sometimes they hit you in the eyeball. Sometimes they splash all over the place. You're doing a good job though. Now, I wish you guys could smell it in here because we're smelling lots of layers of flavors right now. This is still a pretty hot pot and there's still quite a bit of fat in there. So even as the tomatoes are hitting it, they're starting to the sugars in those tomatoes are starting to caramelize a little bit. We have a lot of like fragrances coming off from the garlic and from the peppers in there. It just smells awesome, doesn't it? Here, you want to get the last ones? There's still more.
Oh yeah, a lot more.
Oh yeah, you can do as many of those as you want. Get them all in there. Now while Blue grinds the rest of those tomatoes in, I'm going to get my beans ready to go in. And as I said, I soaked these for maybe 18 hours. That's longer than I normally would, but I wanted to try speed it up for the show. And what I'm doing now is I pour off all that soaking liquid. You may have noticed it was like bubbly. There's some gases there, and I don't mind getting rid of them. There we go. So I just went through 2 rinses, and now once I've rinsed that, I'm just filling this up with fresh water now, and I'm going to dump that in with that water into the pot. All right. Hi, Snores. What's up? Smell good? Yeah, you might want to go outside. I'm going to pretend he wants our food because it's going to be so delicious. Like, what are you guys doing? Alright, I don't want to waste any of the tomatoes in the can, so I just add some little water to it and rinse that out. I'll put this in the recycling bin. Oh.
No.
That's alright. How's that looking, Blue? Good?
Wash my hands.
Alright, wash your hands. You got tomatoes on them. Good job with that tomatoes. I wanted to show you guys where we are right now. So we started with oil and onions and built that up. We added some garlic. Then we brought in some other flavors that we wanted. We brought in some toasted cumin, and we brought in some soy sauce. And if you don't have all these, and we brought in some harissa, but if you don't have all these ingredients exactly, that's fine. At this point, if I wasn't as familiar with this, I'd be tasting it a lot because I should already be developing some flavor right now. I feel pretty confident about where it is, and I'll save some of that for later. But if you aren't sure and you're using something you're not used to, go ahead and take a little taste. Just don't burn your tongue. Should be pretty hot. So I'm going ahead and I'm adding my beans now. And you see my beans, if I spread them out, like they're covered, but they're still like not super liquidy. These beans are going to cook and expand. They're going to swallow up the liquid, and we're also going to boil them at a hard boil for 10 minutes. All of that's going to use up a lot of water. So I'm going to add some more liquid there because I don't want these to get too dry. All right, so I'm going to add a good amount of liquid there in addition to what we already had because I don't want this to get too dry. Now, this is going to cook down quite a bit. We're not going to have a final chili that's anything like this in terms of how watery this is, but this is where we're going to start out. And, you know, I think as we were talking a little about umami and how we're building that, I think I'm going to take a piece of seaweed, just one, and throw it in there. And I'm going to take a little bit of this dry shiitake powder and throw that in there. Not a lot, just a little bit. I don't want this to taste like shiitake mushrooms, but I just want to bring some of that extra flavor in there. All right, so this is cooking now, and this has a lot of cooking to do. I'm going to let it come, it's on high heat, and we'll let it come to a hard boil. We're going to do that for 10-15 minutes, and we're going to bring the temperature down and let it simmer for a while. Should we get started on the cornbread?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me just set this aside. Snorri, how you doing, bud?
I'm snoring.
He's like, he wants to be in the action now. Is this where it's all happening, huh? Are you going to come to every show now? Now that you know what's happening? All right. So let's go through the ingredients we need to use for our cornbread. Just put those aside there. Okay. You want to get some eggs out of the fridge too?
Sure.
All right. So we're going to talk about cornbread in the same way that we just talked about the chili. I'm realizing this show's going to go a little longer than the recent shows have. So if you're in a rush to get out, you can always watch these after the fact. You can watch them live, but you can also watch them after if you haven't figured that out already. So let's go through cornbread. The ingredients are pretty simple. We've got cornmeal, baking soda, salt, eggs, buttermilk, and sugar. And that's it. So it's a pretty simple cornbread. There are more fancy cornbreads, but I'm going to just diagram the cornbread for you just the same way we did the chili. Remember, we had onions, and the beans, tomato, pepper, spices, and the flavor that we added in. We're going to think of the cornbread in a similar kind of way. So in the case of the cornbread, we have right here our dry ingredients. So we'll just call this dry. And this is going to consist of the flour or the cornmeal. It's going to consist of your leavener. And in this case, we're using baking soda, but you could use baking powder. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And we're also going to add a little bit of salt in here. All right, so that's your dry. Here we have our wet. And this consists of eggs and buttermilk. So there are all sorts of recipes. Some have buttermilk, some have water, some have regular milk. And I'm realizing I left something out here. There needs to be fat. Actually, let me call it, butter. We'll use butter. And I'm going to call this the fat. And so that could be oil, it could be butter, and a lot of cases people would use lard for these things. And then the last thing we have is any sweetener. And in our case, we're going to use a little bit of sugar, but you could use honey, you could use maple syrup, you could use other kinds of sweeteners. So this is the structure for building a cornbread. So if you said to me, I have, what do we have here? I have blue cornmeal. What can I do for cornbread? Well, you can use the blue cornmeal in the dry part, You can use it with some wet ingredients, and you can use it with whatever fat you have and whatever sweetener you have. You need to make sure, though, that you're keeping the ratios approximately the same. If you want something to be a little more dry, you can shift it a bit. But what you see here is we have 2 cups of cornmeal, and that's to 2 eggs and 2 cups of buttermilk. I picked this recipe because it's a really simple, basic place to start. If you want to do 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of flour, and you wanted this to be a similar sort of moistness, you could stick with 2 eggs and 2 cups of buttermilk. If you wanted to move away from buttermilk to regular milk, you might go down a little bit here because buttermilk is a little bit thicker and a little less wet. So you might go down to 1.5 cups, 1 3/4 cups of regular milk here instead. If you wanted to add an extra egg, you might remove a little bit of buttermilk. So you're keeping the total amount of liquid about similar. And if you had a white cornmeal, you might use the white cornmeal here. You might use that with white flour. You might use it with fresh ground flour. You might use it with rye. All those things are okay to play with. And historically, people would play with lots and lots of different recipes. One of my favorite cookbooks of all time, unfortunately, it's out of print, but we had Crescent Dragon Wagon as a guest on the show last week. And this cookbook is one she wrote. It says over 200 recipes. Almost every recipe in this book is cornbread of one form or another. And it's a lot of fun because it's just a big deep dive into cornbread. And so as I've made these different cornbreads over the years, I've written little notes on them. Brooke was just flipping through it before the show, and that was funny. This one's called The Perfect New South Style Cornbread, and I wrote in January 12, 2013. I used Up and Gill corn. I said it's bland, it was okay, but not great. But some of these, this one, Truman Capote's family's cornbread, many, many times a favorite, you know. So we have different notes on the different cornbreads. And there was a point in time where every time I wanted to make cornbread, I'd pick this up and I'd try and find a cornbread recipe I haven't made. I bought mesquite flour because some of the recipes in here require mesquite flour, which I still have in the freezer. It's a really fun thing. It's sort of like acorn flour. But what I found after making lots and lots of cornbreads is they're all sort of the same thing. They're just variations on the theme. And you can start out with this cornbread, which is very basic, and I'm hoping that some of you would play around with it. I definitely wouldn't go out and buy something you don't already have. Hopefully you have most of these. If there's something missing that you don't have at all, go ahead and by all means get yourself that. But otherwise, start with what you have in your kitchen. If you've got white cornmeal, use that. If you've got blue cornmeal, use that. If you have yellow cornmeal, use that. I'm going to talk a little bit about baking soda, baking powder. Yeah.
There's a question.
Yes.
Somebody asked what kind of dog Snorri was.
What kind of dog is Snorri? A big dog.
He said Newfoundland.
Snorri's a Newfoundland. Yeah, he's a Newfoundland. He's a good boy. Maybe we'll have a little Snorri cam later. Yeah, he's chilling with us. He's happy to be where we are. I'm gonna baking soda right here. We need a little supplemental science lesson on that. Baking soda is one option for quick leavened breads. Another is baking powder. Baking soda, let me grab baking powder to show you guys. Okay, here's baking powder. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate. Baking powder is sodium bicarbonate plus a couple of other things. And the difference is typically baking powder is a double acting leavener, which means the first action happens when you mix the ingredients. The second happens in the oven at temperature. There's another difference, which is baking powder doesn't require you to have an acid present. But, like I said, baking powder usually does include sodium bicarbonate. And what happens, sodium bicarbonate is a base, it's an alkaline, and when you combine it with an acid, it produces carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is what you capture in your breads or cakes or whatever you're making to create that lightness. And baking powder usually includes sodium bicarbonate. This is just sodium bicarbonate. You play with these at a 3-to-1 ratio. So roughly, so you'd be doing 3 teaspoons of baking powder will give you an equivalent to 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So if you need to make a substitution, this is a little rule of thumb that you might use. Why? Baking powder has fillers in it. It has some really powerful ingredients in there that really like to get going. And so they put fillers in there to make it easier to measure, because otherwise a lot of the recipes would take like 1/8 of a teaspoon and people wouldn't have an accurate measure of that. So they put some fillers in there to bulk it out so it's easier to measure. Just sort of a funny little fact. But this is basically how the ratio would go. Now, baking soda is a little more old-fashioned. So if you find a recipe that just has baking soda, it might be an older recipe. People used to use a lot more sour things. They had better access to sour milk. They had sourdough starter that they were using. So having something sour that was an ingredient wasn't hard to get to. As we went through industrialization, people moved away from so many sour ingredients, and baking powder started being used more. So newer recipes tend to have baking powder. Some people combine the two, which I've always thought it's a little bit funny. I think when you use baking powder but no acid, you can have a little bit of that sodium bicarbonate, which is part of what's in both of these, left over, and I can't stand the taste of unreacted sodium bicarbonate. The taste of baking soda unreacted is like, tastes terrible to me. So I usually like to use baking soda and then make sure there's an acid in the recipe. So what we're going to do here is use baking soda. Now our acid right now would be buttermilk, but we have this issue, which is that I don't have any buttermilk. So, sorry. So we're going to do something else instead. We're gonna substitute milk for buttermilk just by adding some acid to it. So to go through the ingredients, I'm just going to go through the ingredients that we're going to use for our cornbread. We're going to use some cornmeal, and I have cornmeal from Plymouth Gristmill. I love these guys. I love what they do. We work with them a lot at Clover. They're wonderful. They are shipping mail order right now, so if you don't have cornmeal, order from them. If you have cornmeal, make some cornbread and then resupply your pantry. These are some different kinds of cornmeal that are from those guys. This is another cornmeal. This one's called Farmer's Ground cornmeal. It's from Trumansburg, New York. So there are a good number of farmers in the New England area that are growing heirloom varieties of corn right now. I would say support them. Let them know we love what they're doing. The flavors they bring to you are just awesome, and the price of these are going to be a little bit more than a cornmeal you might buy in the grocery, but it's still not a lot of money, and it's really beautiful, delicious stuff. So I'd encourage you to use cornbread as an opportunity to support some of our local farmers. I have some milk here I'm going to use. This is real milk from Pylon Farm. You could make this with not real milk, but it's it will change the recipe a little. Maybe we'll do a whole vegan cooking segment separately. I'm using some apple cider vinegar. This is from Vermont. There's lots of great apple cider vinegars from Vermont. My baking soda is Arm & Hammer, so that's nothing that's locally produced. And my eggs are probably, a lot of these are our own eggs. Some of these might be from Codman Farm, which is just down the road from us. And so these are the ingredients that we're going to need to make the cornbread, and a little bit of butter for the pan. So let's get started on that. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our milk and we're going to put 2 cups of that in. We're going to put them a little scant, so I'm actually going to 1 2/3 or so, 1 3/4. Say it's 1 3/4. Now, with my vinegar, I'm putting in 1 teaspoon of baking soda. And as a rule of thumb, I want 2 teaspoons of vinegar for every 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So you want twice as much. Do I grab a teaspoon measure there, Blue?
Sure. Teaspoon.
I'm just stirring the chili. It's nice and liquidy, and that's great for right now. And it's at a hard boil. It's probably about 8 minutes into that boil. We'll go for another 5 or 6 minutes at this hard boil, and then we'll turn the temperature down. Okay. And can you grab butter from the fridge, Blue?
Sure. Oh, I got butter.
You got it already. Awesome. Thank you. So let us take this butter, and we're gonna do let's do 3 tablespoons of butter. We're gonna get this pan hot now. This is the pan that we're gonna use to make our cornbread. So we're letting that heat up, and we're gonna put that butter in it once it's hot. So I'm going to take this vinegar here, and because I have 1 teaspoon of baking soda, I'm going to do 2 teaspoons of vinegar. Now, I hope I'm not boring people with like my focus on these ratios and all the descriptions I'm giving you. But what I'm hoping to arm you with is some confidence to try to understand some of these recipes and play around with them yourself. You can do all sorts of different things in the kitchen. You can make a lot of different variations of cornbread, and I'd love to see the different kinds of things people come up with. So this is one rule of thumb. We're going to write another one up here. So 1 teaspoon of vinegar for 2 teaspoons of vinegar for every 1 teaspoon of baking soda. So that's another little rule of thumb. So it's sort of a 2-to-1 ratio there. And I've added my teaspoons of baking soda to this milk. So the milk has acid in it now, which is what we needed to do, which is great. Do you want to get a dry cup of measure, Lou?
Sure.
All right, so we're going to use, this is fun. I was out of the Plymouth gristmill or cornmeal, but I went around to all the Kroger locations today just to check in on things, and I was able to pick some up. So we normally, and when we're open, we sell these retail in our stores. But right now, if you want to get some of this cornmeal, you're going to have to go to Plymouth Gristmill online and order some, mail order. We posted a link to that store when we put out a email, and if you didn't get that, you can always sign up for our emails on our website, and we will post all sorts of links like that. It's really important in my mind that we're working right now more than ever to help producers in our area, because we're going to come out of this this COVID self-quarantine, and I'm hoping that the things I really love a lot about where we live are still there, and one of those things is Plymouth Gristmill. So I want to make sure we're supporting them, and I can only do so much, but I'm hoping to spread that word, and I'm hoping you guys can tell friends of yours, because keeping these different vendors that we love working with, and that includes George Howell, that includes Plymouth Gristmill, that includes Charlie Bear, Bear's Beans, and Michael Doctor. But letting them know, one, that we care a lot about what they do, and also giving them the means to keep doing it, I think really important to what kind of future we're going to have. So here I've got cornmeal. I'm going to now take my teaspoon measure of my baking soda. And my baking soda is coming out of here a little clumpy. You can look in there, and you can see it a little bit clumpy. So I'm going to show you a little trick that you can do when that's happening. It's very common for this stuff to clump up. You see it's like clumpy, and see there's little clumps. But those things won't react well because they won't be well mixed. So I'm running it through this, and I'm going to just push those little pieces through. See that? It just takes a second, but it's going to help me with my sensitivity to that unreacted baking soda taste that I can't stand. All right, and this pan's becoming hot. I can see it's just on the edge of smoking. That's just telling us we need to speed up a little bit. I turned down the temperature on it. I just mixed this in here. We're going to get ourselves a teaspoon of salt. Can't forget our salt. All right, there's a teaspoon of salt. And I love this recipe because it's 2 cups of cornmeal, 2 eggs, 2 cups of buttermilk, 1 cup of baking soda, 1 teaspoon baking soda, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of sugar. So it's nice and easy. I like recipes like that are easy for me to follow. Let's wait a minute. We'll wait until we're ready, just about ready to put this in. So you don't want that butter to burn on there. So I put in a teaspoon of sugar. Would you like a little more? So feel free to riff on it. If I wasn't making it with Blue, it'd have a little less sugar in it. Blue loves the sugar, so an extra teaspoon is not going to hurt us. This isn't in the recipe either, but I'm going to put a little bit of pepper in there, sort of coarse ground peppers. Mix this all around, and that's just cornmeal with some seasoning. There's not really anything else in there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pour that liquid in, and we're going to crack a couple eggs in here. Sure, here you go. Sorry, I went so fast there, huh? Trying to catch up with I've been talking too much in this episode. There we go. Awesome. And now I'm going to mix that. I don't want to mix it with that I don't like to dirty things, but that whisk is going to mix it a little too aggressively. And I want a little gentler mix happening, so I'm getting myself a wooden spoon. I start with small circles in the middle, and I slowly increase the size of the circles. All right, I want to combine all these ingredients. Okay, so the batter becomes a pretty wet batter. So it's less like a bread dough, it's more like a pancake batter. All right, so we've got that well mixed now. And we're gonna take this butter and we're gonna put that in the pan. This pan's pretty hot, so I'm gonna help it out. So this is 3 tablespoons of butter. Now some cornbread recipes will have butter in the cornbread, in the cornmeal. And this one, we're just putting it in the skittle. Some will have, you can put oils or other things in there too. And I'm just turning down the beans a little bit as we do this. Just they hit their 15 minutes of hard boil there. So we're just stirring this around. I'm just doing that because I don't want the butter to burn. Like I said, this pan is pretty hot. And what we're going to do is a common technique when you're using butter like this to lubricate and add to the flavor. We're going to let the bubbles die down a little bit. See how the white's dying down? But it's going to turn color. It's going to get dark if we let it go too far, and we don't want to let that happen. So what's happening, some of the water in there is coming away from the fat, and that's what's causing all those bubbles. But as all that water gets away from the fat, the temperature of the butter is going to start skyrocketing. As that temperature goes hotter and hotter, that butter is going to start to burn, and we don't want it to brown. That's right at the right spot for us right there. So we're going to pour this into the middle of that hot pan and all that butter. There we go. And now you can see the cornbread is starting to cook a little bit. You can see that? It's starting to bubble and cook a little bit in some of that hot fat on the side. That's great. That's what we want to have happen. We're going to take this off the burner now, and we're going to bring it into the hot oven. This is a 450 degree oven, so it's quite hot. And we're going to cook the cornbread in there. We're going to cook the cornbread until the middle is going to be like just almost cooked, but not quite. And if you think about, if you're looking at the cornbread and it's in a pan like this, the edges are going to be well cooked. In about halfway to the center is going to be well cooked, and we'll be able to see that. The center itself is going to be just undercooked, and that's what we're going to be aiming for, because when we take it out, it's going to continue to cook. And if we overcook it, if we wait in the oven to the point where the center is all the way cooked, we're going to have a cornbread that's a lot more dry than what I'd like. So that's how we're going to judge this cornbread. And let's take a quick look at our chili while the cornbread's cooking. Blue, you want to put those eggs away?
Sure.
And then I see you were looking over there to see if there's questions, huh?
Yeah, I have no questions right now.
All right. So if people have questions, feel free to ask them. We'll get to that in a couple minutes. So we turned this down. It's still pretty hot, but it's not blasting away at the highest temperature. And we're going to cook this until it gets to be real thick and more chili-like. And then we'll finish it at the end with some salt, and maybe some chili powders just to get it to where we want it to be. I think that one of the things I might add in right now is some dried chili peppers. So these are pasilla peppers. They're not actually that hot. I'm just gonna cut this with some kitchen scissors. I'm cutting out the stem and most of the seeds there. And I'm going to drop that pepper right in. I'm going to do that with another one. Drop that right in.
Are they spicy peppers?
No, they're not very spicy. In fact, we could even let's add another one. At the end, we may find ourselves like adjusting the salt. We may adjust the sweetness a little bit. There's a lot more seeds in this one. We may adjust the sweetness a little bit with some brown sugar or something like that. I wouldn't want the chili to end up too sweet, but we might need that to balance it. And again, we're probably, if we add sugar to this, we're going to be trying to stop short of that place where you can taste this sugar. We don't really want that, but we might want just a little bit of sweetness to help balance it. Clover was about to launch chili on our menu before the shutdown happened. So we had been working on developing some chili recipes for Clover, which are a little bit different, but it builds in the exact same way. It's a little different recipe than what we have here, but the same basic ideas. And we never really got to carry that out, but maybe when we come back, we can make some chili for everybody. I'm gonna take a little peek at this cornbread. It's looking really nice. I'm careful to not pull all the heat out of the oven. I'm just mostly peeking at this for your sakes, but you can see it's still wet there. But I want it to keep cooking in that nice hot oven, so we're gonna keep from leaving that door open too long. If anybody has any questions, you can let me know what they are. And then I think probably what we'll do is, this all needs a little more time cooking. So I think what we'll probably do is sign off and then come back in a half hour or so. Well, probably 10 minutes for the cornbread, maybe a half hour, a little bit more for the chili. And I'll show you exactly what we're aiming for and what they look like at the end.
We talk about onions.
We talk about onions. Oh, how they make you cry?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking that it would be fun to have some sciencey things, but I think we should do the sciencey things maybe as separate little segments that people can tune into if they want. Are there any questions people have before we sign off? There's a whole lot more great pictures that I have from things people have made at home, which are awesome. I haven't queued them up to share today, but tomorrow I'll share a bunch. And if you have some things you've made at home that were inspired by this show, it could be exactly one of these recipes, or it could be some other thing that you were just excited about making. Please go ahead and share them. If it's on social media, just tag it with hashtag #InAir'sKitchen. And if it's not on social media, you can just send it directly to us. Yeah.
There's a question.
Yeah.
So, in Boston baked beans
Yes.
recipe, I think if they said is, but I think they meant to say if. If you don't have dry mustard, how do you substitute it?
Well, you can leave it out altogether, or if you have mustard, dry mustard, it's going to be most like yellow mustard. So if you have some yellow mustard, you can use a little bit of that. That'll work fine. You can make Boston baked beans with molasses, yellow mustard, and ketchup, and you can get a really yummy result. That's not exactly the recipe we showed, but if you're short on things in your pantry, you can pull it off. Yeah.
Someone asked if you could repeat the cornbread recipe.
Yes, we can repeat the cornbread recipe. And after this is over, we'll put these, it's not always clear on YouTube. YouTube's navigation's a little funny, but every video has a description area, and in the description area we're including the recipes. I'm working on getting a website up where I can have a better repository for all the recipes, but we'll go through this again. 2 cups of cornmeal, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of salt. And Blue, if you were not going to use baking soda and you were going to use baking powder instead, do you remember how much you would need to use? We had a little conversion here. So 1 teaspoon of baking soda is about the same as 3 teaspoons of baking powder. So if you didn't use baking soda, you could use 3 teaspoons of baking powder. And if you did that, do you remember another change you might make to the recipe? We would take out the vinegar that we added to the water. You just use regular milk and not buttermilk. So we got 2 cups of cornmeal, 1 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of salt, 2 eggs, 2 cups of buttermilk, or what we actually did today is regular milk with 2 teaspoons of vinegar in it. So we did 1 3/4 cup of milk with 2 teaspoons of vinegar. We have some butter. In this case, we used 3 tablespoons of butter and 1 teaspoon of sugar. We put in 2 teaspoons in the end, but this is the recipe we were working from. Any other questions coming up there, Blue?
Not yet.
Not yet? Okay. All right, well that's cool. We will sign off. This chili is developing really nicely. I would think, just looking at this, I like to get to a place where some of these beans are distinct, but some of them have broken down, and the whole thing is thickening really nicely, and all those flavors have gotten to like sort of a longer, slow cook spot. So I'm guessing it's probably going to be another half hour, maybe a little longer. Yeah, Blue?
Someone said you told them to suggest sodas for tomorrow.
Yes.
So
Okay.
ginger,
Soda suggestions.
Ginger sodas, strawberry sodas, and
Ooh,
strawberry.
strawberry soda sounds good, doesn't it? Man, I wish I had some strawberries. All right, I love those ideas. Ginger soda and strawberry soda. So tomorrow we're going to do a quick pizza. This pizza is not the fancy artisanal pinnacle of a pizza that you could ever make. What this pizza is a pizza you can make at home about as fast as you can call in pizza and have it delivered. And maybe a little bit slower than just heating up a frozen pizza, but not that different. The benefit is that you can make it with ingredients you know, and you can do it with your kids, which is a lot of fun. So we're going to make that. It's a very quick pizza recipe tomorrow. We're going to need yeast and flour to get going, and then some tomato sauce and cheddar cheese or whatever else you like to put in a pizza. That recipe for the flour though is going to require yeast, and we're going to make that tomorrow at the start of the show. And I think in an hour we're going to have pizzas coming out of the oven. So it should be a very, very quick pizza recipe. And in the meantime, we're going to fit in some sodas, and we're going to teach you how to make some sodas at home, which should be a lot of fun. I'm going to take one more peek at this cornbread. This one's looking closer. So you can see it's starting to puff up. It's starting to cook. It's still a little bit jiggly in the middle, and that tells me it needs a little more time, but it's getting closer now. It's probably got another 5 or 8 minutes. It's not far off. All right, a last question? Yes, rolling in now.
Soda.
Vanilla soda. Vanilla soda we can definitely do. We have some beautiful vanilla beans over here. I think this one's from Curio Spices. They are also closed right now at their shop, but this is a wonderful, wonderful spice company that's on Massachusetts Avenue in Cambridge, near Pembleton Market, if anybody knows that place. And they are selling online right now as well. So if you're down on any spice in your kitchen, I would go and check out their website. Another spice company that I love a lot is this one here, Burlap and Barrel. And we'll try and provide some links to these different things as we get that website together. These guys are in Brooklyn, but they do a wonderful job sourcing really beautiful, very fresh dried spices. You got another one?
No.
All good?
Someone just asked if
Just something
we could,
funny?
do it on knife sharpening.
A knife sharpening.
Episode.
Oh, we did do knife sharpening.
Well,
We'll have to direct them to that previous episode. Remember that?
yeah.
We could do more on knife sharpening, but we did it a quick one. All right. Thank you, everybody. That's going to be it for today. Thanks for joining us. Tomorrow, super quick pizza, and we're going to do sodas. This all is about to finish, and when it does, I'll take some videos of this and share them so you can see those as well. Thank you.